The basement door creaked open, a protest against its disuse. Daniel hesitated, a shiver crawling down his spine. Musty air, thick with the scent of damp earth and decay, wafted upwards, a ghostly exhale. He flicked on the light switch. A single bulb sputtered, casting a dim, sickly yellow circle that did little to pierce the oppressive darkness. He stepped inside, each footfall echoing in the silence. Concrete floors, cold and damp, met his shoes. The air felt heavy, charged with an unseen energy that made the hairs on his arms stand on end. Cobwebs, thick with dust, clung to the rafters, shrouding the unseen corners in an unsettling veil. He pushed on deeper into the unknown heart of the house. The previous owners, an elderly couple, had left abruptly, leaving behind remnants of their lives. Boxes stacked haphazardly lined the walls, their contents a mystery. The air grew colder, the silence more profound, as if the house itself held its breath watching him. He felt a presence, unseen but palpable, a whisper against the back of his neck that sent chills racing down his spine. Daniel ran a hand along a dusty shelf, leaving a clean streak in its wake. He coughed, the air thick with motes of dust dancing in the weak light. Shadows stretched and twisted along the walls, mimicking his movements with an eerie life of their own. He paused, listening, heart pounding in his chest. A soft, scraping sound like fingernails on wood seemed to come from the far corner of the basement. He strained to see through the gloom, his pulse quickening. An old wooden rocking chair sat in the corner, its back to him. It swayed slightly, a gentle rocking motion that sent a tremor of fear through him. He took a step closer, then another, his eyes fixed on the chair. It stopped moving, as if aware of his scrutiny. He reached out a hand, his fingers brushing against the rough-hewn wood. It was cold, unnaturally so, as if the chill of the basement had seeped into its very core. He pulled his hand back quickly, wiping his palm on his jeans as if he'd been burned. The scraping sound started again, this time closer, coming from behind him. He whirled around, his breath catching in his throat. An old chipped doll lay on the floor, its porcelain face cracked and staring up at him with vacant eyes. He hadn't noticed it before. He bent down, picking it up gingerly. The doll's dress, once a vibrant blue, was now faded and torn, its lace trim yellowed with age. A small folded piece of paper slipped from its grasp. He unfolded it carefully, smoothing out the creases. A child's drawing rendered in crayon stared back at him. A stick-figure family stood outside a house, the sun beaming down from a bright blue sky, but the house was different. Its windows painted black, and above it, scrawled in a child's hand, were the words, "The Bad Place." He turned the paper over, his fingers trembling slightly. On the back, written in a spidery script, was a name, Emily. A cold dread washed over him, a sense of unease that settled deep in his gut. Who was Emily, and what was the bad place? He shoved the drawing into his pocket, the doll falling from his grasp with a soft thud. He needed to leave, to get out of this house, this place that felt heavy with unseen eyes and whispered secrets. A heavy wooden chest sat against the far wall, its dark wood a stark contrast to the bare concrete. It was ornately carved, depicting scenes of a bustling city, but the details were obscured by years of grime and neglect. Daniel approached it, drawn by an inexplicable pull. The air around it felt different, colder, as if a draft had swept through the basement. He knelt down, examining the intricate carvings. He ran his fingers over the raised surface, tracing the outline of a horse-drawn carriage frozen in time. The wood was ice-cold beneath his touch, sending a shiver down his spine. The chest was locked, a heavy iron padlock securing its secrets. He tugged at it, but it wouldn't budge. He stood up, glancing around the basement, his unease growing with each passing moment. The silence felt heavier now, punctuated by the sound of his own breathing. Something was here, watching him. He could feel it. He turned back to the chest, compelled to know what it held. He had to open it. Daniel searched the basement, his heart pounding in his chest. He needed something, anything to pry open the lock. The air felt thick and suffocating, the silence broken only by his own frantic movements. He found a rusty crowbar leaning against a stack of boxes, its metal cold and slick in his hand. Back at the chest, he wedged the crowbar under the lock, putting all his weight into the effort. The wood groaned in protest, and then with a deafening crack, the lock snapped open. He threw open the heavy lid, a cloud of dust billowing up to greet him. He coughed, waving it away as he peered inside. Yellowed linens, moth-eaten clothes, and old books lay nestled within. He reached in, lifting out a leather-bound journal, its pages brittle with age. He opened it, his fingers trembling slightly. The first page bore a name written in an elegant, flowing script. Catherine. The name sent a chill down his spine. He had seen that name before, etched into the headstone of a grave he had stumbled upon in the overgrown backyard earlier that day. The grave of a young woman who had died over a century ago. The same name as the woman in the old, faded photograph he had found tucked inside the journal. Daniel flipped through the journal, his heart pounding. The pages were filled with entries, the ink faded but still legible. He began to read, his eyes scanning the spidery handwriting. Catherine's words, penned so long ago, filled the silence of the basement, painting a picture of a life lived in the shadow of tragedy and loss. The air grew colder, the single light bulb overhead flickering erratically. He shivered, pulling his jacket tighter around himself. A sudden gust of wind, cold and sharp, blew through the basement, though all the windows were tightly shut. The pages of the journal fluttered wildly as if caught in an unseen breeze. He slammed the book shut, his eyes darting around the room. The shadows danced and twisted, growing longer and more menacing as the light flickered above. He could feel the hairs on the back of his neck prickle with a sudden awareness. He wasn't alone. Something was here with him, something unseen but palpable. He could practically taste it in the air, cold and bitter like the breath of winter. He scrambled to his feet, his heart thudding against his ribs. He had to get out of there. Daniel stumbled back from the chest, dropping the journal on the floor. He felt a presence in the room now, cold and oppressive. The light bulb flickered again, plunging the basement into momentary darkness. When the light sputtered back on, he saw her. A woman stood in the shadows, her form indistinct but her presence undeniable. She wore a long flowing dress, her hair a cascade of darkness down her back. He couldn't make out her features, but her eyes, 2 points of light in the gloom, seemed to pierce through him, filled with an ancient sorrow. He stared at her, frozen in place, his breath caught in his throat. Her gaze shifted to the journal lying open on the floor, then back to him. He saw a flicker of recognition in her eyes, a connection that transcended time and death. She reached out a hand towards him, her touch a gossamer whisper against his cheek. He recoiled, fear finally breaking through the paralysis that had gripped him. He stumbled backwards, tripping over a loose floorboard and falling hard onto the cold concrete. When he looked up, she was gone. Section 8. The Scent of Lavender and Regret. Daniel scrambled to his feet, his heart pounding in his chest. The basement felt heavy, suffocating, as if the air itself were pressing down on him. He backed away from the chest, his eyes darting around the room, searching for the ghostly figure that had haunted his vision. But the shadows held their secrets close, the only movement the flickering of the dying light bulb overhead. He could still feel her presence, though, lingering in the air like the scent of lavender and regret. He picked up the journal, its leather cover cold and damp in his hands. As he clutched it to his chest, he felt a sudden sharp pain, like a pinprick on the back of his hand. He glanced down and saw a single drop of blood welling up on his skin. He brushed it away, his breath coming in short, shallow gasps. He had to get out of this house, this place steeped in sorrow and secrets. He turned and ran, the journal clutched tightly in his hand, the echo of his own fear chasing him up the stairs and into the cold, unforgiving night. Section 9. The Journal. Days turned into weeks, but the memory of that night in the basement, the chilling encounter with the woman from beyond the veil, continued to haunt Daniel's waking hours. He couldn't shake the feeling of being watched, of unseen eyes following his every move. Sleep offered little respite, his dreams plagued by visions of the old house, its shadows whispering his name. He found himself drawn back to the journal, its worn leather cover strangely comforting in his hands. He spent hours poring over Catherine's words, trying to decipher the secrets they held, to understand the connection she seemed to have with the house and its unsettling history. Her entries were a tapestry of love and loss, of a life cut tragically short. He learned of her love for a young man named William, their dreams of a future together shattered by a tragic accident that claimed his life within the walls of the house. He read of her grief, her despair, her growing obsession with contacting William beyond the grave. And then the entries stopped abruptly, leaving a void of unanswered questions. Section 10. An Unsettling Truth. As Daniel delved deeper into Catherine's story, he began to notice chilling parallels to his own life. He, too, had lost someone he loved, a tragedy that had left him with a profound sense of loneliness and a longing to bridge the chasm of death. He felt an unsettling kinship with Catherine, their grief a shared language that echoed through the years. He found himself drawn back to the house, compelled by an unseen force to uncover the truth behind Catherine's fate. He explored the dusty rooms, each creaking floorboard and cobwebbed corner whispering her name. He searched for clues, for answers, for some tangible evidence of her existence beyond the grave. And then, one evening, as the sun began its slow descent, casting long shadows across the backyard, he made a startling discovery. He unearthed a small heart-shaped locket buried beneath the roots of an ancient oak tree. Inside, nestled against a lock of dark hair, was a miniature portrait of Catherine. The resemblance to the woman he had seen in the basement was unmistakable. Section 11. Unanswered Questions. The locket felt heavy in Daniel's hand, its weight a tangible connection to the past. He stared at Catherine's face, her eyes gazing back at him with an unsettling familiarity. He could no longer deny the truth, the reality of her presence, however ethereal, within the walls of the house. He realized that his initial fear had given way to a sense of melancholy, a deep empathy for Catherine's plight. She was not a malevolent spirit, he sensed, but a soul tethered to the mortal realm by unfinished business, by a love that transcended the boundaries of life and death. As darkness fell and shadows crept across the old house, Daniel stood in the basement, the air thick with the scent of lavender and the weight of unspoken words. He knew he could never truly unravel the mysteries of the house, nor could he hope to understand the depths of Catherine's despair. But as he closed the basement door behind him, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was leaving a part of himself behind, forever bound to the secrets of the unfinished basement and the ghostly presence that lingered within its depths.